Okay, welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution podcast, sponsored by Jointflows. And today we are joined by Joe LaGrutta, the founder of JO. It's great to have you here. How are you?
Doing great. Happy to be here. Excited to be part of the team here.
Awesome. Well, we know you're a bit of a rev-ops genius, so it's great to have you here. We look forward to picking your brains. Anything you want to add to your introduction?
Yeah, no, just I've been in the rev-ops space for a little while now, so kind of seen like a really cool evolution and all this AI craze and all the new technology coming out. I'm excited for the next wave of it. So happy to kind of dive into all the different aspects of it. It's cool to see the evolution of something that used to be so small and now is becoming such a hot topic.
Absolutely brilliant. So let's jump straight into it. As you just touched on as well, RevOps has become a bigger and bigger part of most organizations. If they don't have a RevOps function already, they're starting to get them in. And we're seeing that role evolve more and more and more. What we're also seeing happen, obviously, is a change in terms of how revenue is actually generated within businesses as well. So sales cycles are taking longer. Some companies have more of an emphasis on expansion in existing business. They see that's the way to grow revenue. Others are refining how they process the new business side of the business instead. How are you seeing the role of RevOps evolve and change with the times as well to kind of help align with the additional complexity that we're seeing now?
Yeah, and I think you just nailed it right at the end there. I think it's becoming more complex. I think we're starting to see an increased need to work a little bit more cross-functional. So not only RevOps used to be, there's a lot of hot debate is like RevOps just sales ops, is it just marketing ops? And now more than ever, you're really seeing RevOps need to be cross-functional, working across marketing, sales, and customer success. So I think it's become a little bit more complicated, but I think the value of RevOps is increasing for that exact reason. So, I think being able to manage all the systems for the longer life cycles and the longer sales cycles, I think is becoming increasingly important. I think kind of making sure all the systems talking together. I was just watching, a video and it was talking about like in 2023 into 2024, contextual sales is going to become even more important, especially now when we're starting to see a lot of things like content generated so fast and you're starting to get all this spam out there. Being very specific and very intentional with your communication is becoming very important in sales cycles. So now being able to do that across all your systems in an easy enabled way for sales folks and marketing teams, I think is really where you're starting RevOps kind of become, a little bit more strategic instead of the order takers that we've seen in the past. So it's exciting to see that. I think there's also a lot of folks that need to start thinking about that in the future. And thinking about architecture in terms of strategy instead of architecture in terms of just supporting. So I think there's a lot more capabilities for revenue ops to then be a revenue generating function instead of just an order taker function.
Yeah, talk about how you define the differences between RevOps being involved as order takers as opposed to being involved in a more strategic role.
Yeah, so I love this because I think a great RevOps person is somebody that is strategic, that helps align business goals and works towards business goals and strategies, instead of being somebody who's a little bit more reactive. So I believe RevOps should always have a strategic plan, a roadmap, not just system oriented, but also business strategy oriented. So if a company has KPIs and revenue KPIs, that RevOps is involved with those, whether it be in a supporting function of how they're going to build systems to enable sales and marketing to hit those goals, whether it's involved in the forecasting and reporting to help enable those goals. But I think they should be involved in all aspects of that instead of just always kind of being on the reactive side. A lot of times we see RevOps, fall on like a sales team or a marketing ops team, and they're a little bit more reactive words. Here's the marketing's goals, and now we need this, this, and this from marketing ops, or we need this, this, and this from sales ops. And that's where you start to get into this role where it's like, I'm not in control as a RevOps leader. I'm more so reacting to what everybody else needs. Even though if I zoomed all the way out, I could identify areas where there's efficiencies to be gained or there's other revenue opportunities. And I think that's where, you start to make that jump. There's like a really good quote, and it's like, your failure to plan is not my emergency. And a lot of times as operations folks, we get, if somebody doesn't plan well and then they come to us and it's like, I need this campaign out tomorrow, or this thing broke. And it's like, that's where you kind of get stuck and you're like, all right, well, now I have to address the emergency instead of being a little bit more proactive and addressing those things up front.
I love that. I just wrote that down. Your failure to plan is not my emergency. Not heard that
Yeah,
before. That's a great
I
one.
love that. I
Yeah.
love that.
Joe, I've seen the evolution of RevOps firsthand through my experience in different companies, from not having a seat at the table to having a seat at the table to having the main seat at the table. What's your take on this? What's your view on the increase of importance of RevOps being involved in budget decisions, in long-term strategies, during board meetings?
Yeah, I think this is a great question because you know, for those of us, we don't have to give my age away, but like for those of us that have been around like a little while, you start to see that there's been this like general evolution of things becoming more technical, higher reliance on technology, and you're starting to see tech budgets for marketing, sales teams, and just businesses in general start to increase. So when you start to have that stronger reliance, it's becoming a fundamental part of your business and a fundamental component of just business strategy in general. So to not include the person or the team that's managing that significant of a budget and that can see across a lot of different functions, I think you're missing a big piece of the puzzle. So I think RevOps should definitely be a seat at the table. What that looks like, I think it's you know, a little unique to every company, whether it's in you know, under a COO or whether it's in the sales department or marketing team or whatever that looks like. I think there's some debate that could be had there, but I definitely think that we're starting to see a little bit more progression of involving RevOps earlier in those decision-making processes, more than we've ever seen before. So that's exciting to me. And then it also gives that unique perspective, right? Because RevOps in general is able to see technically and also strategically. And I think they're one of the most unique positions in the company to be able to do that. So yeah, definitely should have a seat at the table for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And budget decisions as well. Like we used to, even just 6 months ago, you could get something signed off by a CRO, and then that would be essentially the ultimate decision maker in that specific budget line. And now the CRO doesn't have a say basically on the decision. They can champion, but the decision is made by both the CFO and the RevOps leader.
Yeah. And I think that's like that joint effort is really where kind of the rubber meets the road in a lot of ways, right? Because it's you know, that's like a combination of being fiscally responsible and then also operationally responsible. And then a lot of those times, you know, we've in the past, if it was just CFO oriented decision, you know, you're seeing a, you know, budget line item, you're not understanding the business impact. And a lot of other times, you know, if a CRO is making some of those decisions, they're seeing the business impact and not the holistic budget concern. So a lot of times I've actually seen revenue operations manage budgets across the company as well, which I think is fascinating as well, not just sales and marketing, but across a number of different functions. I'm involved with like the forecasting and the budgeting and planning that way as well. There's a lot of cool tools, like Productive is a really cool tool that helps you like manage budgets across different tech stacks and what's been used. And you know, a lot of those things can start to fall into a revenue operations function, which then gives them, you know, ripple effects throughout their entire organization. So yeah, budget's definitely an interesting concept in RevOps.
Yeah, for sure. I think what we're seeing is that obviously buying committees are becoming bigger and bigger. There are different ways to win with different stakeholders, right? What's important to the CFO is not necessarily what's important to the CRO, which might be very different to what's important to RevOps. So how do you go about winning with RevOps? What is it that ultimately the sales rep needs to consider? What is it we're trying to prove to RevOps to get that deal over the line and get buy-in from RevOps?
Yeah, I think it comes down to business impact. And I think, you know, we talk about ROI, but I think also in the RevOps world, there's also ways to quantify efficiencies as well. And I think those optimizations and those enablement factors go a long way. So when you're talking, whether it be to a C-level executive or you're talking to an individual sales rep, having those conversations, whether you're talking about cost savings or you're talking about revenue improvement, there's opportunities for both in that. And a lot of times, one of those decisions, whether you're talking about a tech improvement or you're talking about a process improvement, or you're talking about an overall goal, a lot of times that decision has two prongs. It can be both cost savings and revenue improving. And I think as RevOps folks, in order to win and have those conversations intelligently, they need to do a better job quantifying those impacts. And I don't think us as a group in the RevOps world do as good enough a job, talking about those benefits, because it's not always to, like a sales or a closed won deal, or sometimes it's also to the general bottom line, seeing that, we've cut this, software and improved it over here, and that improved our costs, which then led to a better net profit. So I think talking about how we quantify that in cost savings and revenue optimization, I think that's where you can start to win as a RevOps folk.
Yeah.
Joe, we are seeing a lot of consolidation projects happening at the moment, and there's certainly a trend on over equipment, basically having too many tools, having too many technologies implemented at once. Where do you feel the tipping point is in terms of the amount of tech you've got for your organization?
Yeah, it's only going to get worse, in my opinion, because I think you're seeing all these AI tools come out every day, and everyone wants like an individual point tool for like, this AI tool can do this single feature, and then it's like all of a sudden you have all these tools. But I think the best way to answer that question really comes down to, are you getting the most out of the tools that you purchased, right? Like, even when I recommend AI tools, I'm like, give it 90 days. Don't like do it for 30 days and be like, okay, this tool is okay, and then let me try this other tool that doesn't do this. And I think you need to get the most out of your tools. I think enablement is a big piece of it. Are your users using the tool? Are they getting the most out of the features? When you bought that tool, was there a roadmap that you had in place and now you're hitting those goals? I think a lot of times we get into tech debt because we're not leveraging the tools to the best of their ability at this point. So when we're talking about new tools, I say look at your existing tech stack and see what capabilities that are in your tech stack that you aren't using today. So a lot of people talk about all these different AI tools, and I think that's a part of it. But I'm like, look at your existing vendors first and see what offerings they're going to have now or in the next 6 months before you go and try and find a point solution that will cover, maybe that little gap that you're not using. Because I always say it's like the game of telephone, if you're familiar, because it's like once you have one tool to talk to another tool, to talk to another tool, it just gets worse and worse. Your data continues to get worse as it goes through all these systems. So if you can keep smaller amount of tools doing more capabilities, I think you're in a good place. The number of tools per company, I don't know if there's like a magic number there. I wish there was, that would be cool. But I think really kind of focusing on getting the most out of your existing tech stack before you start to look externally, I think is the best way to do that.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of companies where there's duplication of capability, and just to your point, they buy this point solution to do something, but it's also got like a 30% overlap with another tool as well, and it's a knock-on effect. And then what you end up having is a ton of inefficiencies as part of that as well. So totally aligned with you in terms of understanding what you can do with the current set of tools first. So I know you touched on AI a little bit there as well, and it's quite an interesting topic for me because we're quite fortunate. We obviously get to speak to loads of people on a regular basis, and there's a real split and a real divide is what I'm seeing across not only RevOps, but even people within new biz and client services as well, in fact, in terms of if they're pro AI or not, or against AI even. You seem to be very pro AI. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I think there's no stopping the wave of AI. So I think it's either embrace it or
yeah,
get a little bit.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's about understanding how you can get the most of it. But what is it? How are you seeing AI play a role in RevOps at the moment, and how do you see that evolving over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, I heard a really good definition of AI that was very simple, and it was AI is just smarter software. And it's very simplistic, but I think in a lot of ways it kind of resembles what we're starting to see in the world of RevOps. Because what I'm most excited about is not those individual point solutions like the AI solutions like that do an individual use case, but what I'm excited is the existing tech stack vendors that I'm using today that are incorporating AI. So ChatSpot and HubSpot being one that's exciting to me to start to see the different features there. Einstein GPT coming out for Salesforce is very interesting to me. So being able to use a conversational flow to build an actual automation in Salesforce, it's very interesting. It opens up a lot more capabilities. Do I still think that it's going to take away a RevOps job? I think we're years away from seeing that type of advancement. We still have the hallucinations that happen in all of the AI tools where you say something and it just assumes that it's correct, even though it's incorrect. So we're going to start to see that even with the points, even with like Salesforce and HubSpot and those solutions. I think for me, it gets interesting once we can start to incorporate more capabilities for RevOps folks, where then they can start to be a little bit more strategic. So if it took you, an hour to build a workflow that did some complicated multi-steps before, and now you can go into Salesforce GPT and say, I want this workflow to do this, and it builds the bones for you, and then you can be a little bit more strategic about how it functions. That's what's exciting to me. So I think there's a lot of pros that come with that. Yeah, and then just if the recommendation engines that can be involved in these tools as well, saying like, hey, we noticed that you missed your MQL goal last month, but then we saw a drop off in like lead to like marketing to sales handoffs. Like that's interesting as well. Like I think we'll get there. Are we there yet? No, but that's like the intelligence and the recommendations and the proactiveness of software is what's exciting to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a lot about the efficiencies it's going to build, and it's going to be the time saving, allowing you to be able to work smarter and actually get more done in the day as well.
Yeah, and I think what will happen too is a lot of people say it's going to take jobs, but it's going to create new jobs too. Like we've never heard of a prompt engineer before, but I think there's going to be other roles that we're not even aware of that will eventually happen as well.
Yeah, I agree. And there's so many more applications as well built around the usage of AI. Joe, I've seen RevOps being an enabler, but I've also seen RevOps being a dependency for business. Like, what do you feel is the recipe for success for an efficient RevOps team?
That's a great question. And, I always say this, and it's like, if you teach a man to fish, he can, feed himself. And I think that's an important thing to do. So as RevOps, we have a lot of different stakeholders that, we're accountable to. So sales being a big one, marketing teams being a big one, customer success. And I think if you can enable your end users to be capable of doing things in the tool, it frees up a lot of time of, some of those back and forth errors that could be accounted for. So a lot of times we say RevOps gets bogged down in a lot of the day-to-day stuff that is user error or just enabling users. But I think doing sufficient training and sufficient enablement and having resources available for end users to do things themselves frees up a lot of time for you to work on some of those bigger rocks that we call it, like the bigger projects. Where you can be, work on efficiencies and work on some of those strategic items. So I think there's that balance of being able to set time aside to address day-to-day things like fires that come up or things that break, but then also spending, 70% of your time focusing also on larger things, strategic projects that are going to move the needle and change the organization. But I think a lot of that, I think as a group in RevOps and just operations in general, I don't know if we do a well enough job of enabling our users to be self-sufficient. So a lot of times if they run into an error, it's, drop it into Slack and ask RevOps team to help me out. And it's like, but did you, go to the documentation? Did you figure it out yourself? And I think kind of creating that culture leads to a better RevOps function in general. And then it can be a little less crippling because, if you're a user and you reach out to RevOps, and they have 10 things to do, they might not get back to you and then you're stuck, even though you could have learned and figured it out yourself.
Yeah. When do you feel like RevOps is required to be part of a company? Because is there, like, usually you don't start with a RevOps department when you grow a company, and then eventually you're needing one. Where do you feel this shift happens? Is it a number of employees? Is it a specific growth pace? Is there a specific turnover amount that you feel like is the pattern?
Yeah, I would say it's probably unique to every company and probably a little unique to different industries as well. But typically what we start to see is when you have your leadership team, maybe on the individual, departments, your marketing, your sales, et cetera. But I think once you start to get individual contributors across sales and across marketing and across customer success, you need to start thinking about operations, because operations will amplify the success of all those individual contributors as well. So we start to say, they can also work better with each other. So you do have that exponential improvements that you get from that. So not only efficiencies, but communications in general. And then also they do then support the leadership team as well. I'm a big believer in getting RevOps in early. I had a CMO that I worked with one time, and her first hire was a marketing operations person. And I don't know that follows the same suit on sales teams, because you need sales teams, you need a sales team. But at least starting to see that you need that operations person early, because then they can be involved with the general architecture and the general strategy and operations that follow when you're scaling. I think what gets concerning is when you build processes early on without an operations person, they don't scale. Then you bring somebody in, you're starting to start from, you're a little bit behind already, and then you're doing more cleanup and fixing than you are doing strategy and product.
Yeah, I've seen that firsthand, where rev-ops got involved way too late in the growth of the business, and the CRM they were using was just unfixable. So they had to rip it. It took a year to find out that it was just too big a piece of work, and they had to replace it with something else.
Yeah, and we see that all too much, don't we? And then you're losing that money that you invested into like a CRM system, you're repaying it. So would it have made sense to instead save that money and put it into a revenue operations, talent, and then kind of save that money and scale? That's what you see.
Absolutely. I've seen companies where rev-ops work really well across different teams, and because there's a strong sense of collaboration there. And then I've also seen companies where actually rev-ops almost work in silo, which is not what you're looking for, because that's not how you're going to build efficiencies within a company. I'm going to ask you to paint everyone by a brush here at the moment, but if you had to pick one team which is generally the blocker to building efficiencies and collaboration, what team would it be that's getting in the way of rev-ops succeeding?
That's a good question. You're going to get me in trouble here with one of the departments. I will be lying if I didn't say we typically see the sales team. So I'm gonna edit that part out, I guess. No, but we'll see the sales team. There's a lot of different moving pieces in the sales team, and we also see, I'm a former sales guy myself, so I understand it's like I'm just trying to close deals. I'm just trying to and whether I update my CRM, whether I do all the processes and follow all the protocol, we typically see that a little less. We sit on the marketing side, we typically see a heavy reliance on operations in order to execute campaigns. So I almost say they don't have a choice. But on the sales side, we typically see, especially those sales orgs that grow really fast as well. And, not necessarily having all the onboarding and consistent processes in place. Sometimes it's no fault of their own of just being on that side, but that would probably be the one that we see a lot.
Yeah. I could put my hands up and say that when I was younger, back in the day, I was probably one of those guys getting in the way. Just trying to start. Lucky me.
Back in the day, like 2 days ago, where you created 600 duplicates in our CRM platform.
Hey, just trying to close deals, right?
It's interesting what you said, Joe, about having that background in sales as well. And even when we speak to people in enablement, for example, and things like this, moving from one background to another can either work really well, and it allows you to be good at your job because, for example, you might relate to specific teams, but then also it can be a hinder as well. So, an example we got for someone else we spoke was someone moving from being an SDR into enablement, then trying to tell AE what to do. At times they might look at them and say, well, actually, you've never closed a deal, so I don't know why you're speaking to me, especially if they're experienced, right? I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but given your background and moving into RevOps, how did you find that was beneficial for you? How did that set you up for success?
Yeah, so it's funny because my first jobs out of college, I was in sales, and then I actually transferred to marketing roles and demand gen, and I did a lot of freelance work. And so I was the end user or the stakeholder of what RevOps is now. So I was in their shoes. So I think where it helps me in that case is you can be a little bit more proactive, so it's you're telling me that you need this built for a campaign, but I could also see you're going to need tracking, and you're also going to need this, you're going to want to report on it. And you can kind of start to see a couple steps ahead. I like to say you can see around corners, right? You can see what's coming and what needs to be done and why. I think probably the key thing there is the why something needs to be done, and not just saying, okay, you need this and I'm going to do it. I think that's probably the biggest thing. I would say it's interesting that you said that about coming out of the discipline, because I find that really good marketing operations folks tend to evolve out of a marketing discipline, and they're just really technical. So some of the best marketing ops folks that I worked with, were either in demand gen and like we just had a really good knack for technical and invested into building that skill. And now they're just awesome because they know what you need, when you need it, why you need it. But sales ops is a little bit trickier, it seems, because sometimes you have, to your point, someone who's maybe a little less senior on the sales team getting into operations, and they can't see that full picture just yet. So I would say, probably as a group and RevOps in general, there should be, and I think we're starting to see some people do it, more training out there, right? Like you don't go to a school to be in RevOps. And I think that's probably a missing piece that we have here. So you can learn the discipline. When I train people in marketing ops or sales ops and say, here's information about the discipline, and then here's the technical skills. I think both are important.
And Joe, based on your experience, you obviously come across a lot of companies in different shapes and states. Like where do you feel like companies are getting it wrong? When do they do the wrong thing systematically that leads to a bigger problem, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think not thinking holistically, and it's probably like a blanket statement because that's probably across any business in general. But I think especially when it comes to either system architecture or data, or how teams will work together, that's typically where we say like operations can come in and start to blend those things together and be a facilitator. And I think once you're starting to think in silos, or you have a department head thinking in silo, and like I want to build my marketing team this way and do this, this, and this, or I want this piece of technology because I'm used to it, and another salesperson wants this piece of technology because they're used to it, instead of thinking about holistically the general architecture. I think that's probably one of the bigger pieces. I would probably say the second thing to that is, especially going forward now, is not having a general focus on data and integration of data, because that's going to become increasingly more important. And there's a lot of companies right now that have a lot of siloed systems, and that's just creating a lot of inconsistencies. Everyone's familiar when you go to a meeting and everyone has reporting on the same metrics and they all have different numbers, and it's like those things kill trust in data. They also kill collaboration. It's a lot of finger pointing, and those things start to create a general culture of mistrust. So data and general collaboration and architecture, I would say, are the big ones.
So what's the what's the solution? Because I'm really intrigued by that. Is the solution to have everything to flow into one system, and for that system to then translate and kind of unify all the data sets? Or is it better to use touch point solutions to report on specific one-off data points?
Yeah, so the short answer to that, and you probably won't like it, is it depends. I think in a perfect world, when we get to the enterprise level, we love to see all that data come together into a CDP, into a data warehouse. And then you have standardizing rules that run on it to make sure everything's standardized. But a lot of companies, it's not worth the effort to build out a data warehouse and an ETL layer or a CDP and all that fun stuff. So what we do for some of the smaller companies that can't get to that point is we do have systems that are a source of truth. We call system of record, right? So it's like, this system is your marketing, MQL or whatever the case may be. And this is where we report on it. That is the source of truth. Salesforce is a source of truth for sales data or whatever it may be. So we do start to define what those are. I'm a big believer in data dictionary and being able to define what those metrics are, how they're calculated as well, and what system is that source of truth.
How do you determine which system should be the source of truth?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. A lot of it comes down to general tracking and data quality. So for example, if I'm looking at, we'll use MQLs as a common one. And it's like, marketing is defining what an MQL is. Can we make sure that their tracking is set up correctly? Where are they managing the scoring for that? Where are they managing the general logic? If that's in a marketing automation system, and then that's typically, I would say, when the first system that it hits would really be that source of record. Because once you start to get through integrations, it gets a little bit more dangerous. Like I said, like a game of telephone. Once you start to go through an integration, other things can happen. So if we're like looking at MQLs and scoring and HubSpot, and then it's like it gets past the Salesforce, it should be fine. It should be consistent there. But if something has happened in the process, or maybe a Salesforce automation kicked off, we wouldn't want to look in Salesforce for that. So typically wherever that logic or business logic is happening, or that general first touch of that information, would probably be the system of record. But hate to say and always caveat it by it depends, but probably.
Yeah. Should become a politician, Joe.
Yeah. I play both sides of the fence, I guess.
That's the ultimate RevOps. Keep everyone on side. Awesome. I think we're just about out of time, Joe. I could speak to you forever and take all the knowledge you have to share, but we do have a tradition on the show to wrap up. So one final question from your great illustrious career you've had to date. What is the best memory that you have, whether it is from when you were selling, whether you're in marketing or what you're doing now? What's the best memory that you've got and why?
That's great. So actually, when I started my career, I worked at Madison Square Garden, and I was a big Knicks fan. And I got to go to all the games and sit there. I don't know if you're familiar, but I met Carmelo Anthony once, and it was really cool. I was on the court, shook his hand, he smiled at me, and I was just like, I was speechless. So I was like, this is like a dream come true. Going to Madison Square Garden, working there every day, being on the court, seeing my heroes. That was cool, and it was cool. I was actually I got brought in there to work on CRM and sales ops and stuff. So it's cool how that has helped me, do some of the other, fun things in my life.
Amazing. Great answer. Well, this has been the Revenue Revolution podcast sponsored by Jointflows. It's been great having you, Joe. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Enjoy, guys.
Thank you, Joe. Bye.